11-year-old Marcus Odom had been in 8 different foster placements across 6 years. And on the day he stood on the Family Feud stage as part of his current foster family's team, Steve Harvey asked him a simple, warm-up question meant to get an easy laugh from the crowd. "What's the best birthday present you ever got, young man?" Marcus thought about it for a moment, looked directly at Steve, and answered with a single sentence that made 200 people in that audience go completely silent and made Steve Harvey step back from the podium entirely. "I never had a birthday party, so I don't really know what a present feels like." The morning had unfolded like any other taping day at the Atlanta studio. Steve arrived just before 9, running through his usual pre-show routine, teasing a producer about a coffee order gone cold. Backstage, Marcus sat with his current foster parents, the Hendersons, alongside their competing family for the day, the Castillo family from Texas. A large, warm group of 6 who'd been laughing together in the green room for the better part of an hour. Marcus sat apart from the noise, quiet in a specific, practiced way that his foster mother Angela had learned over the 4 months he'd been with them. Wasn't shyness so much as a habit of not drawing attention to himself. A survival skill built across years of moving between homes, where standing out sometimes meant standing out for the wrong reasons. Steve did his usual round of greetings, complimenting Marcus on his sneakers, unaware of what sat behind the boy's polite, guarded smile. But nobody in that studio knew what was coming. Marcus had entered the foster system at age 5 after his mother, struggling with addiction, was deemed unable to provide a safe home following a welfare check that found him alone in an apartment for nearly 2 full days. His father had never been part of his life in any consistent way. Across the 6 years since, Marcus moved through 8 placements, an unusually high number even within a system where instability is common, the result of a combination of factors that had little to do with anything Marcus himself did wrong. 2 placements ended when foster families relocated for work. 1 ended when a foster mother's own health crisis made continued care impossible. 2 ended when the foster families, in their exit paperwork, cited being not equipped for what caseworkers described only vaguely as behavioral adjustments. Language that masked what was, in Marcus's case, largely a pattern of him withdrawing emotionally rather than acting out in any disruptive way. 3 placements had simply not been renewed when licenses expired, decisions the families never fully explained to their caseworkers, let alone to Marcus himself. Marcus's case file, which Angela had read in full as part of her required pre-placement preparation, documented a pattern that struck her immediately as both clinically noted and quietly devastating in its plainness. 1 entry from his second placement, when Marcus was 7, described him as a well-behaved child who rarely initiates interaction. Language that Angela recognized, once she'd spent real time with him, as a clinical description of a child who had learned that initiating interaction carried its own risks of disappointment. Another entry, from his 5th placement, noted that Marcus had adjusted well, but shows limited emotional expressiveness, a description that, again, read very differently once Angela understood it as the file's polite way of describing a boy who had trained himself out of visible hope. Each transition meant not just a new home, but a new school, a new set of expectations, and critically, in Marcus's specific case, a repeated erasure of whatever small routines or celebrations had started to take root in a given placement. Several of his foster families had, in fact, celebrated birthdays or holidays during his time with them, but the transitions themselves had a way of happening close enough to these occasions, or far enough removed from them in memory, that Marcus had genuinely lost track of ever having a proper, sustained celebration he could point to with confidence. His current caseworker, reviewing his file in preparation for the Henderson placement, noted that Marcus's file contained no photographs from any birthday celebration across the entire 6 years of documented case history, a gap she found unusual enough to flag in her notes without fully understanding its significance until much later. Angela and her husband Dale Henderson had been foster parents for just under a year when Marcus arrived, still building their understanding of the system's particular challenges, having taken the placement specifically because Marcus's caseworker described him as a child whose file showed a pattern nobody had yet managed to interrupt. They'd applied to formally adopt him within 2 months of the placement beginning, a decision made unusually quickly, but one both Angela and Dale described as feeling immediately. Obviously right once they understood the specific pattern of instability Marcus had experienced. Their adoption petition, however, ran into the same kind of procedural delay common across an overburdened family court system. An initial filing was denied expedited status due to standard queue rules regardless of the documented urgency of interrupting Marcus's pattern of repeated placement failure. A second filing, supported by a letter from his current caseworker specifically citing the psychological research on placement instability's long-term effects on children, was still pending with no scheduled hearing date as of the taping. Dale had taken to calling the court clerk's office every other week for an update, a routine that had become almost a ritual of quiet frustration, each call yielding the same answer. The docket remained backed up, and no timeline could be provided beyond assurance that the case would eventually be heard. Angela had started a private journal specifically documenting Marcus's small, incremental signs of settling in, the day he finally unpacked his duffel bag into the dresser. The first time he asked for a specific breakfast rather than simply eating whatever was offered. Evidence, in her mind, that the placement was working exactly as it should. Evidence she hoped might someday support the case for finalizing what already felt, in every practical sense, like a permanent family. What almost nobody around Marcus fully understood, including well-meaning teachers who assumed his quiet, careful demeanor was simple introversion, was how completely he'd learned to manage his own expectations downward as a form of self-protection. He rarely asked for anything specific, not because he didn't want things, but because wanting things that might not materialize or might disappear along with a placement had proven repeatedly, across 6 years, to be its own particular kind of painful. He told Angela, when she gently asked what kind of birthday celebration he might like once his birthday approached that spring, "I don't really need anything. It's fine." A response so immediate and so practiced that Angela recognized it instantly as something closer to a defense mechanism than an honest preference. Angela had noticed, in the 4 months since Marcus arrived, small signs of a child who'd learned to brace rather than hope. He kept his few possessions organized in a single duffel bag rather than fully unpacking into the dresser Dale had cleared for him. He asked, more than once in his first weeks, whether it would be okay if he just stayed quiet during family movie nights, uncertain whether his presence was welcome in moments that weren't explicitly structured around a task. One evening, about 6 weeks before the taping, Marcus had asked Angela, apropos of nothing during a car ride home from school, "Do you think I'll still be here for my birthday?" Angela had to keep her eyes carefully on the road to hide how much the question affected her, answering as steadily as she could that yes, absolutely, he would be there, though she understood, even as she said it, that her reassurance carried the same uncertain weight every promise before hers apparently had. The specific reason the Hendersons applied for Family Feud was almost incidental. A fellow foster parent in their support network had mentioned that the show sometimes connected families with resources that helped move adoption cases forward. And Angela, hoping anything might help expedite Marcus's stalled petition, filled out the application without expecting much. The callback arrived within 3 weeks, and Marcus, when told, asked only whether he'd have to answer personal questions on camera. A fear Angela reassured him wasn't the plan, not realizing how directly a simple warm-up question would end up cutting, regardless. The taping moved through its early rounds with typical energy, the Castillo family loud and enthusiastic. The Hendersons a little quieter but clearly warm with the crowd, Marcus answering 2 questions correctly and earning genuine applause each time, seeming, for stretches of the game, more relaxed than Angela had seen him in the 4 months since his placement began. During a lull while the board reset, Steve, doing his usual bit of engaging the youngest contestants with a light-hearted question, crouched down near Marcus and asked, mostly as a throwaway line meant to draw an easy, charming answer from the crowd. "What's the best birthday present you ever got, young man?" Marcus considered the question seriously, the way he considered most questions, and then answered with total honesty, without any apparent awareness of how the answer would land. "I never had a birthday party, so I don't really know what a present feels like." The studio fell completely silent. Steve, still crouched, went entirely still, his easy warm-up energy disappearing from his face all at once. He stared at Marcus for several long seconds, the silence stretching until even the crew in the wings, sensing something had shifted, stopped their usual quiet movement between segments. Angela, standing at the family podium, brought a hand to her chest, her breath catching audibly enough that the boom mic picked it up clearly. Steve stepped back from the podium slightly, taking off his glasses and rubbing his eyes before crouching back down to Marcus's level. "Say that again for me, son," he said quietly. Marcus, sensing now that something had shifted but not fully understanding why, repeated it, a little less confidently this time. "I've moved around a lot. 8 different families. I guess my birthday just never really lined up right with anybody staying long enough." 300 people stopped breathing at the same moment. But Steve wasn't done. He stood up and turned to his stage manager. "Stop everything," he said. "This has never happened in the 45-year history of this show, and I am not moving past it like it's just another round." A producer near the wings signaled urgently for a break, and Steve waved him off entirely. "No network approval," he said. "This is me, Steve Harvey, and we are stopping right now." He knelt back down in front of Marcus. "Let me tell you something," Steve said, his voice noticeably unsteady. "I grew up in a house where we didn't have much, and there were years my own birthday came and went without much fuss, because my parents were working themselves to the bone just keeping food on the table. I understand what it is to learn not to expect too much, so you don't end up disappointed. But I want you to hear me on this. That is not something a child should have to learn how to survive." He looked over at Angela. "Tell me about the adoption case. All of it." Angela explained the stalled petition, the procedural denial of expedited status, the second filing still sitting without a hearing date. Steve's jaw tightened as he listened. He wasn't finished. He pulled out his phone right there on the stage, something no host does mid-taping, and called a contact at a child welfare legal advocacy organization he'd worked with before. "I need an emergency legal team assigned to expedite an adoption case out of Georgia. An 11-year-old named Marcus Odom. 8 disrupted placements. Current family ready and willing," he said into the phone, loud enough for the front rows to hear every word. "I want a hearing date requested this week." He hung up before waiting for a response, certain of the answer. He turned to face the cameras directly. "I want to talk to everyone watching at home," he said. "There's a child sitting on this stage who has never had a birthday party in 11 years of life, not because nobody wanted to give him one, but because the instability of a broken system kept interrupting every attempt. That is not okay, and it has to change." Angela was crying openly now, and dozens in the audience were too. And then he did something no one expected, even his own producers. He announced that both families, the Hendersons and the Castillos, would split the full fast money prize regardless of outcome, earmarking a portion specifically for Marcus's long overdue birthday celebration. The Castillo family's mother crossed the stage without hesitation, telling Marcus that her own family would be honored to help plan whatever celebration he wanted whenever his next birthday came. 3 months after the taping, the expedited legal review resulted in a scheduled hearing that finalized Marcus's adoption far faster than the stalled petition's previous timeline suggested was possible. Dale later joking, without much bitterness left in it, that a single phone call from a stranger accomplished in weeks what 8 months of his own persistent calls to the clerk's office had not. When the episode aired 6 weeks later, it crossed 250 million views across platforms within the first 2 weeks, and the hashtag I never had a birthday party trended for 8 consecutive days, prompting a wave of public conversation about the specific, often overlooked toll that placement instability takes on a child's most basic experiences of celebration and permanence. With several child welfare organizations citing the case in materials about the long-term psychological effects of repeated foster placement disruption. A year after the taping, Marcus's adoption was finalized, and Angela described his first true birthday party, held that spring with the Castillo family in attendance exactly as promised, as one of the most meaningful days of her life. Watching Marcus blow out candles with an expression of genuine, uncomplicated joy she said she hadn't seen from him in the entire time she'd known him. Today, the Never Had a Birthday Foundation, named directly from Marcus's own words that day, has funded celebration and stability support for over 800 foster children nationwide experiencing repeated placement disruption, and to date has distributed $11 million toward that mission, including a program specifically ensuring foster children in transition never again go without at least one acknowledged celebrated birthday each year, regardless of placement status, alongside a caseworker training initiative teaching staff to flag the specific kind of emotional withdrawal Marcus's own file had, in retrospect, documented without anyone fully recognizing what it meant. Marcus still keeps a photograph from that first birthday party framed on his dresser, the first celebration photograph in his entire case file across 11 years of documented history. In a later interview, Steve said that single sentence remained one of the shortest, plainest statements that had ever stopped him cold in 45 years of television. He wasn't trying to make anybody feel bad, Steve said. He was just answering honestly, the way kids do when they've never had reason to expect the question would matter to anyone. And that's exactly why it mattered so much. Angela still sends Steve a photo every year on Marcus's birthday, and he has replied to every single one personally, usually with a short note reminding Marcus that he deserves every candle on that cake. What Marcus's one sentence revealed to a stunned studio, and to millions watching afterward, wasn't really about birthdays in isolation. It was a reminder that the small, ordinary milestones most children take for granted are not guaranteed for every child, and that sometimes the most devastating truths arrive wrapped in the plainest, quietest language, precisely because the child speaking them has never known anything different. If this story about a foster child's one sentence moved you, make sure to subscribe and hit that thumbs up button. Share this video with someone who needs to know that every child deserves to be celebrated. Have you ever realized, through a child's simple honesty, just how much they'd been quietly carrying? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to ring that notification bell for more moments that restore your faith in humanity.